the engine that runs the spiritually mature church. This world is driven by two separate systems. The conventional view is of a left and right, fighting over the soul of the nation. It's a wonderful vision, but totally false. The left and the right are the two horns of the same bull, fighting God and the people of God, but they fight in different ways, from different sides of the same beast. The horns of the bull are not fighting each other, though they parry back and forth. They are fighting us from two different positions, in two different ways. In the one case, the right wants us to be free to strive after wealth without limit. In the other instance, the left wants us to all grow a social conscience and look after the most vulnerable, in the most generous and unselfish way possible. Both positions have their positive and negative aspects. Both of these philosophies are high on rhetoric and low on insight. They take reason and truth and rip it down the middle, into two halves. We are expected to fight for one half and reject the other half without reservation. But neither side makes sense without the other half. There is no solution without everyone being able to make the best case they can for themselves, and without society ensuring no one gets left behind. But we cannot impose one half of the solution onto society while ignoring the other half of the solution. Neither half, right or left, has the entire solution. Children look for easy solutions. Children are idealists, they can afford to be. At one moment they are consuming without limit, unaware of the costs. The next they are crying over the fate of a spider that is stuck in the sink or the fate of a mouse that pushed its head into a mousetrap. They do not see the contradiction between the two extremes. But then why would they when so many of their elders do not see the contradiction either? One cannot amass wealth and be totally focused on the accumulation of wealth while being concerned for the most vulnerable. If you have any concern for the most vulnerable, there must be a reduction in the amount of time and energy you spend on concentrating more and more wealth in your hands. The two concerns are inversely related, and no amount of political posturing will reconcile the two positions. The right has always accused the left of being socialist, which they are. But if socialism is the state taking too great an interest in helping the poor, the rich with their self-serving proposal for the state to remain neutral, is no less realistic, but of a different kind. Socialism is not strictly about the state favoring the poor. It is the state being a parasite of the rich. This may appear to be an academic distinction, but in fact it is an important distinction to make, as it helps us to see what capitalism is, in a clearer light. The right makes a show of independence, but in reality, it is as dependent on the state as the left. The right may claim it does not need the state to help it, but what they really mean is that they do not want the state taking any of what it has to help others. It does want and need the state to protect its interests as it seeks to extract everything it can from the world. Capitalism is socialism for the rich, and it is as exploitative and parasitic, as is socialism when done for the poor. The problem is parasitism, not the type. Both forms are as wrong as either one is. But the left thinks the parasitism of the right is wrong, and the right thinks the parasitism of the left is wrong. But how does one eradicate the freeloader? The mark of a spiritually mature church, SMC, is one that creates no cost that others pay, that does not enable freeloaders, and that pays everyone for the work they do. These are the three conditions of a spirit-led church. There are two kinds of people in this world, mature and immature. Only the spiritually mature form the church. The spiritually immature may be physically immature, but they also could be physically mature. There is no direct correlation between spiritual maturity and physical maturity. We can see when a person is a child, we can see when a person is immature. We know the child is not always immature for the entire period of his or her physical immaturity, and we know the adult is not always mature. And that is a problem. We know how to bring a child into maturity, physically. We know very little about how to ensure the child attains spiritual maturity. We know even less about how to help an adult who seems unable to leave childhood behind. We know the willingness to accept responsibility is a mark of the mature person. The most mature person is the one so willing to be responsible, they are willing to accept the responsibility for resources that may not specifically be owned by them. As is the case with business ownership. But there is an even higher level of maturity. At this level, the person does not only run a company, but they also run it with such a level of accountability, that the state no longer has an oversight function, and withers away. Faced with this level of accountability, in which no costs are externalized onto society and future generations, the state has no oversight function. If a sizable number of elders or a priori elders are present, there is a spiritually mature church. When the spiritually mature church is fully functional, the state will have been made redundant. Where the a priori and elders operate, only private businesses will be found. These will operate within or as a free market, meaning free of government oversight. The spiritually mature church is a holding company or trust, but it operates as a free market. Individual companies operate within the church. The a priori and elders form a council that operate as a board of directors within the spiritually mature church. But making money is not the objective. The objective of the a priori and elders, their mission, is to generate liquidity. Money is merely the economic oil that permits specialization to increase. Profits are at best a side issue or secondary concern. Money, in fact, follows the gaining of maturity. The immature are consumers. They are not responsible for the costs they create. The a priori and elders form a mission. Our objective is to establish any number of businesses. These businesses are the spearhead of the mission. They are designed for missions work, not just to do business. A priori and elders do not make money for the sake of it. A priori and elders guide people to greater spiritual maturity through what we call business activity. The mission of an a priori and elder is to govern the free market operations of the spiritually mature church. The most spiritually mature have the greatest right to rule, as spiritual elders. This makes them the technical head of the free market, not as regulators but as spiritual guides to help increase specialization. As the spiritual maturity of the church grows and spreads into the community, the church binds more and more of the people to Christ and itself. This is market and business activity. Are you in? This is not a task for children. The first consideration is to find spiritually mature men. These are men who are willing to pay the costs of building the church and with it, an unregulated free market, independent of the state. As elders, we seek the most spiritually mature men to bind with. We do this through forming specialized units, each with its own mission to mature the faith and build the church. Each elder has an account that represents the bond he has with the church. These accounts are what binds us together. Our mission consists in coming together to find ways of helping each other. When we help, we are paid. This is part of the binding. It is what builds the church. It is why the church is consistent with the conditions of a free market. An elder is required to sell all they have and give to those who need help, as a free market response to the alleviation of poverty. We can spend what we have because what we spend will result in a return. That is the nature of the market. The job of an elder is to facilitate the setting up of businesses. One does not sell personal items, unless they are surplus to one's needs. The idea is to increase specialization through free market mechanisms to increase the strength of the bounds that hold us together, as a church. If one amasses unused or underused assets, it drives the price of goods and services up, because keeping resources one does not need is tantamount to hoarding. This is why the spiritually mature needs to get in the habit of living in a minimalist manner. But this brings us to the issue of commercial goods, in general. It appears to be obvious that a person who has invested capital in a business ought to own that business. But the argument is predicated on false assumption. That is, that the entire planet was not already owned and that the assets one thinks one owns are only owned conditionally. Ownership in the negative reality of the present instance is based on force. The individual cannot muster sufficient resources. He needs the state to bolster his claim. The state, by bolstering the claim of the individual to his assets, actually increases their own legitimacy. The rich comment on the injustice of a state that panders to the needs of the poor, but they are adamant in their calls for the protection of private property rights. But who pays for this protection, and why? Why ought the poor to be forced to support their own enslavement and exclusion from the wealth they create? The rich have no intrinsic right to the property they hold. If it is a right, it is a legal right. Legal rights are based on nothing more than patronage. Without the power and self-interest of the state, property rights would not exist. They are nothing more than a political invention, a device to align the interests of the upper classes with the interests of the state. But for Christians, the situation is different. We are not aligned with the state. Our interests, whether we be rich or poor, do not align with the state. The state sits in the high seat of God, as the owner of what God created. The state acts as the owner of the planet, but it usurps the right of the Creator. The church is the authority that operates the planet. The state has no right to it, other than the right of Nimrod, the right of the strong man. The right of Nimrod rests on the law of the jungle, Might makes right, in the end justifies the means. But this right based on the law of the jungle is no right at all. In fact, it is the denial of rights or the abrogation of rights. The law of the jungle says that power is the only thing that matters, and if you do not have power, you have nothing. But all power devolves down to one man. Every power has at its center one man. Every power structure has the form of a pyramid. Wealth goes up the pyramid and power filters down. Power is given to the upper strata in exchange for power. The power translates into property. If one has no property, one has no power. This world is all about the accumulation of property. The lust after power and money and fame, all comes down to the effort to concentrate wealth into fewer and fewer hands. This is why the world gradually takes the form of a pyramid, with one ultimate power sitting in the top seat. This final state is called globalization. But with the church things are different. The church is a flat organization. God is, but all humankind is on the same level. We are all equally under God, so the church is a flat organization. Herein is the rub. How can we have a flat organization if people own assets, and that ownership is very stratified? This is why we need to sell our assets to the church and give the money to the poor to give them work, because this is the only way to induce equality in the church. The engine that runs the spiritually mature church is what we know of in this world as a free market. This is a market that is not regulated, but more importantly, it is a market that has eliminated all freeloading. One can refer to this condition as one of equality. We all are paid for the work we do, that is the only possible equality. Anything else is one group subsidizing another, which means one group is exploiting those who are forced to subsidize them,